Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network. The broadcast shows are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They are not designed to provide listeners with specific personal, medical, or counseling advice. Individuals with a medical issue should always consult their healthcare provider. MS&Me is not responsible for content of individual shows. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own. Enjoy the show.
I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. It's April 16th, and we have a lot to talk about. Last week, I mentioned that I get the most listener email asking questions or sharing opinions about stem cell research and MS and cannabis and MS. And I think that I understand why. For openers, these are two relatively new subjects, new potential treatments that offer the promise of relief from living with MS and its many symptoms. And thanks to social media, there's no shortage of opinions being shared containing what some might say are premature conclusions about these treatments. If you search Google, you'll see that there's as much misinformation and confusion about these subjects as there is good information to be found online. And being able to separate the wheat from the chaff is probably the most critical step you can take toward being an informed medical consumer. So this week, we're talking about cannabis and MS. This isn't the first time, and it won't be the last time that we discuss cannabis-based treatments for MS, but it's the first time that I've had a guest on to talk about it. And it was a RealTalk MS listener who recommended that I speak with Aryn Sieber, someone who they knew to be an expert on cannabis and MS. One thing you'll notice about my conversation with Aryn is that it runs longer than most of the interviews on RealTalk MS. And full disclosure, the reason our conversation runs longer is because we end up in the weeds a couple of times, especially during the second half of the interview. And rather than trim those parts of our conversation, I decided to leave everything in, because I think our conversation itself demonstrates that fully understanding the role of cannabis and MS is still a tricky proposition. And what makes it all so tricky are the details. Like any other drug, it's not enough to know that cannabis might help manage one or more MS symptoms. It's important to know how much to take, how often to take it, and even how to take it. When it comes to things like dosage strength and frequency of dosage, well, these are the kinds of details that we all pretty much take for granted when we're having a prescription filled at the pharmacy. But in what I guess I could call the state of the cannabis industry, it doesn't sound like we're there yet. And without third-party oversight, without industry-wide standards, and without clear dosage guidelines, some cannabis-based treatments for MS are still do-it-yourself projects. And when it comes to ingesting any sort of drug, that isn't ideal. In fact, in some instances, it may not even be safe. Now, please keep in mind, I am not at all opposed to treating MS symptoms with cannabis-based products. Far from it. There are already studies that we've talked about on the podcast that demonstrate that some MS symptoms can be managed with cannabis-based products. And there are some cannabis-based products that are already making their way through the FDA approval process because safety and efficacy have to come first. When I get a prescription filled at the pharmacy today, there's no question that regardless of the manufacturer, regardless of whether it's a name brand drug or its generic counterpart, the dosage, the strength, the potential side effects will always be the same. And I also know that the drug is supposed to be manufactured in a facility that's been inspected by a neutral third party, and that only adds to my overall confidence. There's no reason to expect less from cannabis-based treatments. And because the cannabis marketplace is in its infancy, and in many places it's pre-infancy, none of these safeguards have been put in place. Now, I feel fairly certain that they will be, eventually, but we're not there today. And so it's a bit like the Wild West. And I know that when you're legally purchasing recreational marijuana, a lot of this doesn't matter. Chances are that you won't be getting high right before getting into your car and driving somewhere or operating that piece of heavy machinery at your job. But replacing your prescription medication with cannabis-based medication implies that you should be able to do the same things. And if you listen to my conversation with my guest today, you may be surprised to learn that you can't, at least not yet. Now, if you're not getting into your car or on your way to work, if you're at home and you're looking for relief from MS-related pain or spasticity, then you might evaluate the viability of a cannabis-based treatment differently. So clearly this isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but there really aren't many of those in the world anyway. I hope you take a look at the show notes for today's episode. I'm going to include a few links that I think you might find helpful. You'll find a link to the Cannabis Foundation, whose mission is to educate people about the benefits and responsible use of medicinal cannabis. And I'll also point out that my guest today is the CEO of Cannabis Foundation. I'll also include a link to a scientific paper on the National MS Society's website that provides a very complete overview of a lot of the research that's already been published on cannabis and MS. And you'll find a link to an overview of cannabis and neurological disorders, including MS, that was published by the American Academy of Neurology. So I guess you can say you have a bit of a head start here in separating the wheat from the chaff when it comes to finding reliable online information about cannabis and MS. In a moment, we'll meet my guest, Aryn Sieber, the CEO of the Cannabis Foundation and Cannabis brands. And today, we're talking all about cannabis and MS. There's a tremendous amount of interest in the use of cannabis-derived treatments for managing MS symptoms. And because you can find as much truth as you can fiction about almost any subject you check out on the web, we're at a point in time when there's also a tremendous amount of confusion surrounding cannabis-based treatments for MS. That's why I'm excited to be talking with my guest today, Aryn Sieber. Aryn is a 9/11 first responder and a stage 4 cancer survivor. He's also the CEO and founder of Cannabis and Cannabis brands. Someone described Aryn to me as a man on a mission. He's a strong advocate of using cannabis-based treatments to help relieve symptoms of disease processes, particularly MS, and Aryn's partnered with several MS centers to better understand how cannabis-based treatment can help people manage their MS symptoms while reducing their dependence on other prescription medications. Welcome to the podcast, Aryn.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You know, cannabis contains more than 100 pharmacologically active compounds called cannabinoids. I'm guessing that we're going to be focusing on a couple of them today. So I'm hoping you can get us started by explaining what cannabidiol is and what tetrahydrocannabinol is.
Sure. Well, CBD, or cannabidiol, is primarily known as the non-psychoactive compound in cannabis, or one of them. And truth of the matter is it's non-psychoactive in that it does not give a head high, but it does give what we call a body high, which can be relaxation and also helps with the anxiety. So those are considerations that are made, but again, a lot of people refer to CBD not giving the head high. THC, on the other hand, is known for its psychotropic effect, but then also has great benefits when it comes to many of the conditions that are neuropathic, which is why we believe that we're finding so many great results within the MS treatments, spasticity, neuropathy, fibromyalgia, a number of pain, those types of things.
I think you've already gotten a jump on my next question. Now that we have our definitions in order, can people living with MS benefit from cannabis-based treatments? And you've already started to go into this, maybe talk about which cannabis-based treatments and which MS symptoms will be affected.
So that's a really good question. And I can tell you that we've been studying it now for 3 years. When I say studying it, we've been collecting data. So we have real-world data from MS patients. I currently treat over 300 MS patients with a number of different physicians around the country. And what we have found is that a lot of them that have tried CBD have had absolutely no relief, no effect. But that many of them do need the THC with the CBD. And I might also add, John, is that it's important to note that you can do THC with CBD and not have a psychotropic effect. So it really just depends on the ratio, the potency, and how much one takes. And we're all different, so one size doesn't fit all. So it's really important to understand what each individual is going through. So as far as what can be treated with these cannabinoids, what we've been tracking are spasticity, neuropathy, pain, anxiety, and sleep. The drugs that we've been tracking are baclofen, gabapentin, benzodiazepines, opiates, to name a few of those, and what we've been able to actually reduce and in some cases eliminate altogether. Can I give you an example?
Oh, of course.
Great. So with gabapentin, what we did is we took 46 of the 300 patients that we had, and we looked to find patients that had very similar conditions, taking very similar drugs and those types of things. So out of these 46 patients, 38 women, 8 men, and 37 of them were taking gabapentin, and they were taking 17,100 milligrams a day combined. And in 3 months, we got that down to 5,200 milligrams a day. So many of those patients had actually stopped taking gabapentin altogether, slowly working with the doctor and with us to help reduce that. And some of them have just dramatically reduced the amount of gabapentin, which then reduced the side effects that gabapentin produces.
Now, you mentioned that the CBD-based treatments can't get you high, and even the CBD and THC treatment, depending on the dosage and ratio, might not get you high or won't get you high. What about other side effects from cannabis-based treatments?
So another really good question. And so the side effects of cannabis will affect everyone differently. And depending on what I call the toxicity of one's body. So if somebody's been taking, let's say, gabapentin or baclofen or any of these drugs, oxycodone, for years, many of which have 10, 15, 20 years, they have the tolerance built up in their system. So they may do a sublingual tincture, and it has a very slight effect. So let's just say it's a very low ratio, and ratios being how much CBD to THC. They may need a higher ratio to get a desired effect or result because of how toxic their body is with these other chemicals. So as they begin to reduce some of these other chemicals, they may have a reaction where the ratios could then change. So we may need a higher ratio versus a lower ratio as we start to reduce the medications. Therefore, the side effects can then also be different. So hunger, an appetite, maybe increasing appetite, or some people, if they take a high enough dose, it makes them tired. So it helps them relax and sleep. So they can get rid of the Ambien or something that they're taking. Sometimes they're taking baclofen at night because it makes them so tired, and that helps them sleep. So some of these side effects are desirable in that regard. But then if we uptake it by smoking it, which some people that have severe spasticity, migraines, and those types of things, they need instant relief. And that's where vaping can be highly effective for those people. But the key to all of this is what we call microdosing. It starts low and goes slow. So we increase in little amounts, we decrease in little amounts.
You bring up a couple of really important questions when it comes to taking any drug. How does someone find the most optimal dosage? How do you find the most optimal dosage frequency? And how do you even determine the best method of administration?
So in the first part, how do you demonstrate how much you should take, and then what the effective rate would be? Well, again, it's a process. And that's why what we do, we require an intake form. So just like when you go to your doctor's office, you fill out what kind of drugs are you taking, how much, how long, how far, how often, how effective are they? We ask those same questions. And what we find out is that, we have an endocannabinoid system, and that system is naturally producing these cannabinoids-like enzymes and releasing them within our nervous system and whatnot to help regulate our system. Throughout the day, this system is changing. So, for instance, one person may need a 24-to-1 ratio at night that is better effect for them, and during the day, they may need a 5-to-1, depending on how they're exerting themselves, how the pain comes on, the spasticity, what they're doing to exert their body. So it's a process that's kind of always changing. And so what we do as part of our process is we work with and consult the patient throughout the entire process. Because, again, something might change. They were able to reduce maybe one of the drugs that they were taking. So now they can adjust the ratio or the potency and even the amounts that they're taking. Did I answer?
You did, to a degree, because it sounds kind of tricky. For instance, if I get a prescription for baclofen, it's going to have a specific dosage every 6 hours. This sounds different. And so I think if I'm someone who's used to that regulated pharmacological intervention, every 6 hours I'm going to take this pill, and it's the same pill, same dosage in the morning as it is at night. And that's pretty much how most medications, prescription meds, are going to work. This sounds like it's quite a bit different.
Well, that's an interesting point that you bring up, in that the reason that they prescribe 100 milligrams is because that's what's cost effective on the economies of scale to produce that particular drug. But what if only 80 milligrams is all you needed, or 75? We don't know that because they don't make it in that potency. And you can go to a compounding pharmacy and get it made, but then you're going to pay more for the drug, or maybe it's not covered under the insurance, or whatever the case might be. But they're giving you that 100 milligrams because that's what's most commonly going to be effective. They will also tell you that if it's not working, to increase it. I mean, I have people that are taking 3,000 milligrams of gabapentin a day, or baclofen, and they increase it because the doses that they've given them aren't working. So actually, it's the same process, but what we're doing is we're trying to hone in and target based on what their symptoms are, how long they've had them, how severe they are, again, the current drugs that they're taking. And so I would argue that our process is a little more in-depth. Now, I'm not here to argue against doctors and what they prescribe or anything like that. We have amazing doctors. Western medicine definitely has its place. Some drugs have their place. But what I'm saying is that if we do this microdosing process, we can hone in and hit an optimal amount so that we're only taking as much as we need to take. The other benefit of that is that, again, if I get into the day and let's say I'm standing a lot at my job and I get spasticity in my legs, or I have neuropathy in my feet, and it gets exacerbated by the 4 or 6 hours, whatever the time I'm spending on my feet, I'm going to need a different dose at that point in time. So all we're trying to do is be more tailored to a specific person's needs versus just giving them that regimental 100 milligrams 6 times a day.
Well, let's talk about that person who's listening to our conversation right now. Maybe they're taking baclofen to manage their spasticity, and they're interested in exploring a cannabis-based treatment. What steps should they take? Who do they talk to if they're thinking about trying it? What do they need to do?
Well, the first thing they need to do is find somebody who's pretty, I guess what you would call an expert in cannabis and working with patients. That would be the first thing. And someone like Cannabis, that's what we do. But there are other companies out there. I couldn't point to any particular ones because I don't work with other cannabis companies that are doing whatever work that they're doing. But what I would say is that you'd want to find someone who has that experience and is working with a number of doctors and can provide evidence based on that effect, references, whatever that might be. The other thing is that if someone starts a regimen, you never want to change what you're currently doing. You want to stay doing the same regimen. The idea, what's happening is that people are looking for alternatives because what they're doing isn't working or it's not effective enough. And they keep taking these medications because the doctor says so. There's no other choice in the matter. So we also ask them to rate what it is. So let's say you're taking your baclofen at 100 milligrams 6 times a day. My pain, I ask you to rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10 before you take the drug. Let's say it's a 9. I take the drug, it becomes a 6. And throughout the day, it stays a 6 because I'm taking it this 6 times a day. Well, what if we can take and do that, add the cannabis oil to it, and get it down to a 2 or a 1 or whatever? Now we're at a place where we can start to reduce this other medication to see how effective that's going to be. But again, it's also going to change in that we may need to increase the amount of what we're taking or the ratio as we start to reduce these other drugs. But in no case should anyone ever stop taking anything that they're currently taking. The idea is to come in and do a shift and kind of gradually change the scale.
And is this something that their neurologist should also be a part of in this process?
Absolutely. So, when you say involved in, can you clarify that a little more as to what extent?
I'll do better than that. Why don't you clarify to what extent they should be involved?
Yeah, absolutely, they should be involved. I mean, the doctor, we always tell the patients, before you reduce any medication, make sure you contact your doctor or your NP or whomever you're working with to let them know that you want to start to reduce some of these medications. You're feeling better by taking this, and now we're going to start taking, so let's say instead of 100 milligrams 6 times a day, we're going to do 100 milligrams 5 times a day. And we're going to do that for a day or two, and hey, I'm feeling pretty good. Great. Let's reduce another 100 milligrams. Let's do it 3 times a day. And you keep doing that until you have what I call an episode. And an episode can be spasm attack. It could be a, neuropathy. It could be whatever it is. And as soon as you have this attack and you feel it coming on, you don't add the baclofen or the gabapentin or whatever you're reducing. You don't add that back. You increase the ratio, the potency, or both on the cannabis oil so that you can hit that balance again, right, where you feel that constant relief. Now that we're at that point, we can start to then reduce those medications again. But in no case should anyone ever just stop taking any of those drugs and substitute it with this, with CBD or cannabinoids.
Understood. So, and I assume that as they may be able to reduce one of their prescription medications, the baclofen that we've been talking about, for instance, it's going to be their neurologist that actually writes the new prescription, correct?
I can't imagine there's a neurologist around that would tell someone that if you can take this oil and reduce the medication, that they shouldn't do that. So they would be more in agreement. They're not going to say, okay, reduce it by this amount or that amount. I always tell patients, and I've worked with a number of neurologists, and the idea is to, just like they are taking the cannabis oil, we reduce it very slowly. So if we have a tablet, I tell many people, if you have tablets, cut the tablet in half and let's do 4.5 doses a day instead of 5.
That's my question. When it comes to cutting that tablet in half, that's a prescription drug. Is the patient's neurologist involved in consultation, perhaps, to understand that their patient is going to be doing this? Here's why, and it makes sense, but they're the ones who are managing that baclofen prescription, correct?
Right. So the neurologist is always involved. And the neurologist would agree with that analogy. When we start working with neurologists or new physicians, a lot of times we'll get on the phone together and we'll talk about those types of things. And we'll explain to them, if we're asked what they should do, what a patient should do to reduce medications, we'll go over just what I shared with you, cutting one of the pills in half, and then just do 4.5 doses a day and see how you feel, and then reduce a little bit more as you go along. There hasn't been a neurologist out there that we work with that hasn't agreed with that concept. If they are then reducing it, when they go to renew the prescription, the doctor is going to then write, I don't know, maybe they write them 50 milligram, 4 times a day or something to that effect. But in no way are we telling patients or dictating to them without the physician's knowledge to reduce any medications or that. They should always absolutely let their physician know what their intentions are before they start.
Yeah, I assume that would be the case. I just wanted to clarify it for someone listening who may be a little bit less familiar with this subject matter. You also talked about how, for instance, with a prescription medication like baclofen, perhaps you're taking that 100 milligrams because that's how it's manufactured, and there isn't the opportunity without going to the extra cost of a compounding pharmacy to get 85 milligrams, for instance. Now, you also mentioned that with a CBD-based product, you're going to be experimenting is a wrong word, but you're going to be trying different ratios until that becomes optimized as well. So am I understanding that product is going to be, for the lack of a better term, custom blended for that particular patient?
Not custom blended per that patient. What we do is we have several different ratios that we work with. We do a 24-to-1, a 5-to-1, and a 1-to-1. And we make that in 2 different potencies. We make a 250 milligram and we have a 1,000 milligram. And so between those 6 variables, we will try whichever solution based on, again, the findings of how many medications you're taking, what's their tolerance level, what the sensitivity, metabolizing rates, all those things. And we'll try some small bottles. Rather than buying a 1-ounce bottle, which are what most tinctures are put up in, we recommend taking one of our 10 ml or 2 of those. Because again, at different times of the day, you might need a different blend. So they will take those. And then rather than making a 19-to-1, an 18-to-1, a 15-to-1, and all those different ratios, what we do is we supplement those tinctures with maybe a vape pen, or maybe they take a lozenge. And the lozenges are more like a 1-to-20. So those would be just THC. So in order to change a ratio, and ratios being the first number is always CBD, the second number is always THC. So if we took a 24-to-1 ratio and then somebody did a 2.5 milligrams of THC, which is what the lozenges are, they're very low dose. It's about taking a small amount and adjusting that ratio. So now I've just taken that ratio from a 24-to-1 to maybe an 18-to-1. So rather than doing all those increments and how costly that would be, that's how we make those types of adjustments. And again, we're asking them to journal, hey, I ate half of a lozenge, cut it in half, so maybe it's 1.25 milligrams, to see where they get that desired relief at.
If I get a certain prescription medication that may have a tendency to cause drowsiness, there'll usually be a warning on the label to the effect that I shouldn't drive, or what else do they say? Do not operate heavy machinery, things along those lines. Since it's more of a fluid process where people are trying different ratios and there is THC involved in that ratio, how does someone know that what they're taking is safe enough to get in the car and drive on the freeway to get to an appointment, to get to their job, to get to somewhere where they have to be as functional as they are on the prescription medications, where they understand what those side effects, the drowsiness in particular is what I'm thinking about, how that's going to impact them?
Sure. So just the same way that they found out that baclofen makes them tired, they take it at night. They had to experience that. They would do the same thing with the cannabis. And we also state with every prescription that we put out that you shouldn't drive or we operate heavy equipment and those types of things. So the same rules apply. And so what we also would do is if somebody's taking like a 1-to-1, which is an equal parts CBD and THC, and they're doing high doses, but that's going to be someone that's maybe got stage 3 or 4 cancer and has very severe condition to be taking that level of product. Is to not do it, is to do it at home, experience it and understand it, but again, in no way drive under the influence. So many of these people are taking gabapentin and whatever, opioids, oxycodone, fentanyl, and still get behind the wheel or still go to work and do those things. And the crazy thing is that they can be legal in what they're doing, taking a drug like that, but with something that our body is naturally producing and we're putting into our body that may give us, it's possible, if somebody smoked a vape that they would get high. They shouldn't drive. Yeah, the bottom line is they shouldn't do it. They should experience it at home just like they've done their other drugs. And if they find that they're having an ill effect, then they should pick up the phone, call us, and let's talk through what they did, how they did it, and see if we can't figure out what a better dosing method might be to help them with that.
So cannabis-based treatments are certainly something that's exploding in the marketplace right now. There are some treatments on the market, many others in development as we are speaking. And if it were a pharmaceutical, the FDA would have to approve them. The FDA has some oversight and looks into things like safety and efficacy and all those sorts of things. What is the regulation on all of these cannabis-based products that are on the market and coming soon to be on the market?
Well, interesting you say that because there's been one on the market for a very long time. It's called Marinol, and Marinol has, I guess, helped some people, but it's been also detrimental to a lot of people because it's not the full body, doesn't have the CBD to help balance out the effects of it. So I think that you're going to find that there's going to be more companies like G Pharma who just came out with Epidiolex for epilepsy that are going to be whatever you want to call them, I guess, FDA approved. But I would argue that work that we do, we produce our products in a lab, we third-party test it, we make sure that, what the ratios are, they are, it's all within, a couple of points of what the testing is. So, and then we batch number. So, while you could maybe buy something through a pharmacy, I'm not so sure that people have trust in pharmacies and pharmaceutical companies. It's totally going to go that way because it's all about cornering the market and it's about, it's just the people who want to make the money. And for people like me who've been doing this because this is a passion of mine. I don't know how much you know about my background, but I'm a stage 4 cancer survivor. 4 years ago, I was not in a good place. And as a grower for 40 years, I've always grown good quality cannabis, always had it tested. And so I had the benefit of having that as part of my regimen and my treatments. So I do this out of passion and compassion for patients, knowing what they're going through. And so I have no reason to tell someone that this will do something that it won't do or whatever. And so I guess my point being is that it's, I guess, just finding out why people are doing things. When it becomes a drug that's FDA approved, it's going to be all about the money. So it needs to be people over profits, not profits over people.
I get that. Here's the concern. Every single person coming into this market will say their product is safe. They'll say their product is tested. They'll say they are in it for all the right reasons. And I'm not trying to suggest you're not. I am trying to suggest that not everyone may be. And that's where, for instance, on the pharmaceutical side, there is a referee who isn't in it for the money. And that referee can say, you know what? We've looked at their process. We've looked at their background. We've looked at how they do what they do, and this is safe for you. Rather than saying that's going to be a detriment to the market, I think that is going to ignite it into a whole different dimension, because I can't help but feel that so many people are going to feel so much more confident in trying or even thinking about this as a viable option because safeguards are in place. No?
Absolutely. I would agree with you wholeheartedly on that. So I self-imposed the safeguards, the third-party testing of that. I agree with what you're saying. The FDA is going to come in, they're going to look at it, they're going to test it. But there's bias there also. I don't care what anybody says. I mean, there's no purity in the system. Okay, so what I'm saying is that, yes, people need to trust that. I guess another factor would be is not just somebody coming out and how they're marketing the product in the trunk of their car or whatever, but are they working with physicians? Do they have a track record of helping people? Are they collecting data? Do they have support in those areas? Whereas right now, and before this ever came to be, I mean, the DEA and the FDA has been saying that, it's a Schedule I drug. Yet the Department of Health and Human Services has had a patent since 2003 on CBD. And so therein lies my point, in that it's about controlling a market and controlling what happens to it. If we're talking about controlling it, I agree there needs to be regulation. I agree there needs to be testing, proof of testing, ways of documenting that. But also, I believe that people such as myself, who are working with physicians and have a background and have put in the time and effort and can produce those types of results, I'm one option. If somebody feels more comfortable, and that's why we produce for Stuff in the Lab, is because people don't want stuff that's produced in the kitchen. And I always hear stories. Oh, well, my brother John's got a friend or a cousin, and he grows it and he makes it and whatever. And so I tried it, it works pretty good, and that's what they do. And that may be the limit of what they want. But there are a whole other group of people who want to know, if I do this, is it safe? And so having been super sick, having taken poisons to try and get better, chemotherapy, radiation, I understand that. But yet I still put things in my body that the FDA says are okay, but are killing me nonetheless. So I guess I'm just saying that people have to make a choice. And what they need to do is ask questions. We're getting ready to put out a book about the ABCs of CBD and THC. And so it's to break it down and understand the basics of it. It does need to be regulated, absolutely. But the type of regulation that we're talking about and the way that they control things, I'm not so sure I agree with that. But there does need to be regulation.
Well, Aryn Sieber, I appreciate you kind of walking us through the ABCs of CBD and THC, shedding some light on what I know is an incredibly important subject to our listeners, and one that's still a little bit confusing for a lot of people. So thank you for your efforts to clarify for us, and thanks for talking with me today.
Thank you, John. And just remember, everyone deserves the medicine they need. Have a blessed day. Thank you.
Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. Just a reminder that your feedback, your questions, and suggestions for future podcast episodes are important to me. That's why, in addition to emailing me at john@realtalkms.com, that's JON@realtalkms.com, you can also call the special listener hotline that I set up specifically to capture your comments and suggestions. Just call area code 310-526-2283 in the United States and share your thoughts. So whether you choose to shoot me an email or make a phone call, I hope you'll get in touch and join our conversation. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.